Today, masks are required in 7 Oregon counties, and Friday, Washington's requiring them too. And can I just say, thank goodness everyone's on the same page with this.
I think it's stupid.
I think the mandatory mask is a great idea.
And it's like we're going backwards.
We just cannot wish this virus to go away.
I think it's all government, to be perfectly honest with you.
And while there's no question that masks help prevent the spread of COVID-19, why some black people say masks also open them up to discrimination. And one of Portland's darkest chapters is finally closed.
It is a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of release or parole.
And it's probably no surprise that these conversations
we are here for systemic change
made their way into the courtroom.
It is precisely our differences that afford us the opportunity to be a great society.
Here's the story.
Lots to talk about tonight. Lots. Hey, I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to the story. I get it, okay? No one wants to wear a mask. It's hard to talk. They're hot. They're uncomfortable. They put too much emphasis on my eyes, which are not my strongest feature. I get it. But those points feel to me like very small sacrifices compared to the threat that we are facing. Yet, people still want to take a stand on this, even though most of the arguments against wearing one will often leave you with your foot in your mouth, something that masks can protect you against, both hypothetically and literally. But look, enough of what I have to say. Let's hear what you have to say. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. Find me on Facebook and Instagram, or use Twitter and that hashtag #HeyDan. Okay, back to what I have to say. And let's stick with the mask debate. Why don't we? All right, because there is no bigger story today than the fact that over half of all Oregonians are now required to wear masks inside public spaces. And that bizarre debate between the maskers and the anti-maskers continues. So so we're all on the same page here. Here's where you need to wear a mask now in Oregon. The 3 metro counties, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas. The 2 Salem counties, Marion and Polk, along with Hood River and Lincoln counties. But this is much bigger than Oregon. North Carolina will start requiring them on Friday. A bunch of cities in Florida, including Miami, voted to require them today. And yesterday, Governor Inslee announced masks will be required across the entire state of Washington starting on Friday. And in his announcement, he gave us tonight's quote of the day: "We just cannot wish this virus to go away." Even as we see restaurants slowly start to welcome people back for dinner, bars serving drinks again, all those little signs that real life finally may be returning. But I'll tell you, don't let all of these changes convince you that things have changed, because they haven't. The pandemic is not over. Every health expert in the world is screaming from the top of mountains, wear a mask because it can slow the spread of the virus, just like washing your hands, or keeping 6 feet away from other people, or staying inside when you're sick. I would add more protections to that list, but unfortunately, that's all we got against a virus that's killed 125,000 Americans in 6 months. Now, there are a pair of concerns that we've been hearing about a lot that we want to address. First, from a viewer on Twitter saying, is it illegal to wear a mask and carry a gun? That's a question that's been floating around a lot, and for really good reason. There is a precedent. In North Carolina, for example, carrying a concealed weapon, a gun, while wearing a mask is a felony. But in Oregon, it is not, as long as you have a concealed handgun license. If you do, you're free to pack heat while wearing a mask. There's also a number of exceptions to the mask rule, okay? Kids ages 2 to 12 don't need to wear a mask, but it's strongly recommended that they do. Also, if you have a health condition that prevents you from safely wearing a mask, then you're in the clear. You don't have to wear one. If you're at dinner, for instance, you can take the mask off while you're eating. If you're at a gym, you don't have to wear the mask as long as you are 6 feet away from the other person. You can take it off to work out. Now, up until just before 5 o'clock, there was one more exception. In Lincoln County, people of color were not required to wear them to avoid potential racial profiling or harassment. News of that exemption spread quickly, and that's an understatement, really. It spread really fast and led to a flood of what Lincoln County leaders called horrifically racist commentary. And now the county is reversing the policy, but they're not happy about it. Kristen Severance has been reporting on this story for us all day. She joins us now. Kristen, they even got some pushback from leaders in the black community.
Yeah, they did. And Dan, I also want to point out, Lincoln County is not the only county thinking about this or even talking about it. Taking into account that people of color may feel uncomfortable wearing a mask. But Lincoln County was the only county to put it into writing. And the NAACP chapter president here in Portland said, while this policy was well-meaning, it's misguided. Lincoln County listed its face covering directive on its website. Under exceptions, people with medical conditions, children under 12, people with disabilities, and people of color who have heightened concerns about racial profiling and harassment due to wearing face coverings in public. That last exception made headlines all over the world. And while Lincoln County listed the exception in its county directive, other county health officials across Oregon agree with the decision. Rachel Banks is the public health director for Multnomah County.
So, we definitely support the exemption for folks who can't wear face coverings either because there's medical reasons or for disability, and fully acknowledge that people of color have been telling us really since the beginning of this pandemic that some people that wearing face coverings was a concern because they didn't want to be perceived as a threat.
Banks said they want people to follow the state mandate to wear masks, but they won't be enforcing it.
One of the reasons that Multnomah County is not going to locally enforce a face covering requirement of the governor, we're urging people to do it, but we're not going to enforce because we don't want to add one more thing for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to have to worry about.
Clackamas County officials said they're focused on businesses complying, not individuals.
We're not doing an exemption. However, wearing a face covering does slow community spread of COVID-19, and we encourage everyone who can to comply with the governor's executive order. We realize, though, that for people of color, wearing a face covering is a scary thing, as implicit bias by others can lead to harassing or violent behaviors towards people of color.
But Portland's NAACP president, Reverend E.D. Mondane, believes Lincoln County's exemption focuses on the wrong thing.
They're saying, people of color don't have to wear a mask if they feel, intimidated or threatened. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a wonderful sentiment, but it doesn't work. In April, the CDC released hospital data showing that Blacks, who make up only 13% of our nation, made up more than a third of all hospitalizations. So in other words, people of color are both more likely to get COVID and more likely to die when they do get it. Given this, it seems obvious to me that communities of color should not be dissuaded from following the safety guidelines that are being handed down by Governor Brown and the Oregon Healthy Authority.
The governor's office seems to agree. They released a statement saying, in part, racism is a systemic problem and we need to address the root causes of injustice rather than just addressing the symptoms. For the state's face covering requirements, public health and stopping the spread of this disease is our top priority.
For the community hardest hit by the COVID to be the most afraid to wear masks means that society has gotten its priorities kind of backwards. These are vulnerable populations. These are people we need to come together and protect, and these people do not pose any threat. So I'm asking people simply don't assume. Simply do not assume. When you see a person of color walking down the street, don't assume anything about them that you wouldn't assume of your white neighbors. Wait for someone's behavior to determine how you judge them. The content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Great perspective there, Kristen, from Reverend Mondane, so thank you to him. But it seems that Lincoln County cited some different reasons for changing the policy, saying from their perspective, it seems to have riled up racists in their community.
Yeah, I want to read a few lines from their statement that they gave us just this evening. So they say, quote, "We are shocked and appalled at the volume of horrifically racist commentary that we have received regarding this policy exception." It continues, "Let us be clear, the directive and policy were meant to protect. Threats and racist statements turned it into a policy that now harms." The county said that they received calls from leadership in communities of color who asked them to revise the policy because, quote, "it was not providing them protection, but instead making them possible targets for more hate." So they did revise the policy, and they said, to address the concerns, we're revising our public health directive and face covering policies. It saddens us greatly that we needed to do that. And Dan, so they changed it this evening, and we had a lot of questions for them, about who they consulted with before putting into writing why they made this decision. But they didn't do an interview. They only released a statement, so we can only go by, some of the things I just read.
Yeah, for now. We'll stay on them. Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate it. So Oregon's special session began today, but not without its own mask drama. Oregon lawmakers all showed up at the Capitol in person today for the first official day of the special session on police reform and the pandemic. Now, they got to call in, you remember, virtually while debating these bills, but they all had to be in the same room for the roll call and when voting, so they wore masks. And of course, that led to some mask-related struggles.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm having a mask malfunction, but masks are very, very important.
Now, it looks like everyone had a mask on, except for two Republican senators. One is the guy that people in Dallas, Oregon know very well as their representative, but became better known to the rest of the state when he said this.
Send bachelors and come heavily armed. I'm not going to be a political prisoner in the state of Oregon.
Yes, no mask today for Senator Brian Boquist, who that infamous quote came from the Republican walkout last year. The other lawmaker who didn't wear a mask was Senator Dennis Linthicum. He made headlines last year when he blamed the death of Eric Garner at the hands of New York City police on tobacco taxes. His office sent out a press release titled, "I Can't Breathe. Tax hikes might be a death sentence." Anywho, they both showed up today, and so did everyone else, so they were able to get stuff done. But what exactly did they do? What did they get done? They mostly debated bills related to the pandemic, like making the governor's temporary moratorium on evictions into law. Some of them got voted out of committee, in fact, and tomorrow they'll take up bills related to police accountability, like a ban on chokeholds, for instance, and creating a statewide database for officer discipline records. We heard Senator Lou Frederick talk about those bills on the Senate floor today.
So that we begin to create a new culture, a new system that makes me feel safe, makes my family feel safe, and makes other folks understand that we are all in this together.
The session is expected to last at least a few days. We're not sure how long it is going to take to try and pass everything. Of course, we're paying close attention, and we're going to keep you posted throughout the week about what moves forward. Now, before we go to break here, I wanted to say something about today's sentencing of Jeremy Christian. Now, one of our probably our number one goal as we put an episode of the story together each and every day is to never waste your time. And I hope if you feel like we ever are wasting your time, you'll let us know using the hashtag #HeyDan, because we're always listening. But one of the biggest ways we thought we would waste your time today would be by telling you something that you already know. For example, you already know that Jeremy Christian will die in jail for murdering Talisia Namkai Meche and Ricky Best on a MAX train in 2017. So why get into the details of that? Instead of focusing on him, I'd rather elevate the voices of those who faced down an evil man, a man who targeted black people with his hate. Because listening to people like Sean Ford, who stood between Christian and two black girls as Christian screamed threats and vicious words, or Demetria Hester, who Christian threatened the day before his attack, you could hear in their testimonies echoes of the conversations that the protesters who have been in our streets for the past month or so have been forcing us to have. And it's those stories that we want to elevate here tonight. Those stories. Not that of an unrepentant murderer who Portland is thankfully rid of at last.
For 3 years, we, our community and the victims, have been waking up hoping to come closer to the end of this senseless tragedy. Today is finally here with day 12 unanimously votes from the people of our community that you are guilty. To our community, thank you for the beautiful, amazing resistance and support. Through this, we have changed the narrative and came hard and strong to represent our community. Ricky Best and Talisia are heroes. We will continue to fight until everyone, like Jeremy, is off the streets and they are not welcome here. I blame the system for creating and facilitating people like Jeremy, and then we, the community, have to deal with them. Because of this system, our community was ripped and dealt a harsh reality of how white privilege is and used and abused. Our community is being victimized over and over again by the system, and we are paying for it financially, physically, mentally, and emotionally.
As I shared with one of the prosecutors, I felt more comfortable in combat than I do simply living and maneuvering in peacetime through society in this country. With everything that was going on in combat, I knew that whoever was with me or behind me was only focused on everyone getting out alive, regardless of color, gender, etc. because we had a higher priority at hand. We recognized our similarities and differences as the strengths they were, and the other biases essentially had to take a backseat, albeit temporarily. In this country, we are going through a health crisis, a pandemic, and the terrorism continues. Unveiling yet another centuries-old pandemic of anti-blackness, racism, white terrorism that has never waned or been healed. It simply was morphed into a different-looking plague.
I thought that after the 1960s we would never again see something of that kind.
Proof in the KGW vault that the conversations we're having today,
the only way for us to stop racism is for us to start being against it.
They aren't new.
Fight the power!
And we ask a simple question. What's on your mind?
Just seeing how things are going to pan out.
Not knowing when things are going to change. Black Lives Matter.
Life.
When the story continues. Hey, welcome back to The Story. Thank you to everybody watching and writing in using that hashtag, HeyDan. It never fails to surprise me the kind of the tiny things that people notice when they watch. For instance, last night on the show, I made a comment about a guy running out of time when he's trying to paint every lighthouse in America by next summer. I looked down at my wrist like a watch. I didn't think anything of it, but you know who did? Dennis Anderson from McMinnville. He wrote in, at the end of the lighthouse story, you indicated that you were checking your watch and looked at your left wrist. I didn't see a watch on your left wrist. Was it on your right wrist? Is it transparent? Do I need new glasses? Editors notice these things. I'm not sure the takeaway on that last bit. Maybe you're an editor, or maybe it doesn't take an editor to notice these things. So either way, here is my response. Sometimes I do that as just a reflex. I just hope that one day I'll just pop it out there and I'll look and well, how did, magic. Breitling. Breitling. Is that good? Are those nice? I don't know. Anyway, let's get to something more important, like a dip into the KGW vault. And go back to 1992, because there are a lot of similarities between what happened then and what we're seeing now. That was, of course, the year after Rodney King was beaten by police officers in Los Angeles. The officers were arrested but acquitted by a jury, and that sparked the 1992 LA riots over police brutality and racism. Now, KGW talked to some Portland middle school students who wanted to take a stand after watching the riots on TV.
What the students at Selwood Middle School saw of racism this week made them want to speak their minds.
Ignorance leads to hate. Hate leads to violence. Violence leads to death. Death leads to nowhere.
The students have seen hate, but few of them know how deep that hate goes.
At 15, I saw a lot of stuff. I saw people getting hit in their head.
Donald Granger experienced the Watts riots of the 60s. He thinks Selwood Junior High students won't see that same kind of hatred here in Portland.
I mean, it's not to say that it doesn't go on here, and it's not to say people don't get thumped here for maybe some abuse or something, but I don't get the feeling overall that people are hostile.
Racism has been screwing us over for our whole lives.
And the only way for us to stop racism is for us to start being against it.
That's right! Fight the power!
These preteens don't know the strength of the power they want to fight like their superintendent Matthew Prophet does. He told them about growing up in Mississippi.
If you're a Negro and we think that you have done something wrong, we will beat in your head. And it happened, and it happened. I thought that after the 1960s we would never again see something of that kind.
These students are rallying because of the violence they saw on TV from 1,000 miles away. And they don't like the seeds of racism they find in their own classrooms.
Well, you walk down the halls and you can see clumps of whites and blacks and Asians, and if you're walking by yourself, you feel out of place. You feel like you need to be with one of them, and most of the time you choose your color to be with, and it shouldn't be like that, you know?
These students haven't seen the 60s or Mississippi or Los Angeles, but what they see in their own lives today is enough to make them speak out. Pat Cruz, News 8.
I can see why these Vault segments are so popular. They're just so interesting to look back, especially when the pieces are so relevant to what we're still experiencing today. So if you see something if you have something in your mind that you want us to try and dig out of the KGW Vault, please let us know. You know how to get a hold of us. Use Facebook, use Instagram, use any of those things, or Twitter, and that hashtag #HeyDan. Now, every once in a while, one of our photojournalists just goes out with a camera, sets it up, and asks everybody the same old question. Today, it was, what's on your mind? And as you would imagine, we got a lot of different answers.
There's a lot on my mind right now. What's on my mind today?
We've been home for 120 plus days.
Just seeing how things are going to pan out and how we're going to social distance.
How am I going to adapt to wearing a face mask this Wednesday when I go grocery shopping?
I work at a grocery store, and people come in without a face mask all the time, and it baffles me. We need to go into these things slowly.
Not knowing when things are going to change and how they're going to change, because we know they're not going to go back to the way that they were.
I mean, I think we were all at a point where we were locked in for so long that a lot of us, like mentally maybe, we're having a tough time, so it's nice with this weather at least to be able to get out.
Getting back to work. Getting back to work. I used to run a consulting business and it got obliterated by the pandemic.
Gas money. I don't have any gas in my car because I don't have any work because I was sold street route newspapers and they shut us down.
Honestly, just when I can actually, I don't know, interact with people, go home, see family.
Thinking a lot about race in the United States and what it must be like to be a black person right now in the U.S.
I'd say social injustice and just how our city is going to evolve with both COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement.
I did see like a decline in the protest activity just because of the weekends and everything got opened up. So I'm hoping that people are still there for the cause and that they're there to rally for Black lives and for defunding the police and abolition.
I am Hispanic, and Black Lives Matter at the top of my mind.
You know, with Black Lives Matter, it's been, you know, I don't know, changing for this world, and thank God, it's about time.
And I hope people take that energy and take it to the polls and vote in November.
Life. The journey I'm going, I'm 21, fresh, you know, it's sunny out, that's on top of my mind.
Expensive parking in downtown Portland.
Really?
Yes.
Everyone has their limits, and I think we were getting there for a lot of people.
Well, after spending 3 months kind of locked away, I'm just happy.
Right now, what's on top of my mind is public health and safety for everybody. Peace of mind. You know, the world is changing. Just want to make sure everybody is taking care of themselves and working on being a better person, whatever that means to you.
Hopefully you feel the same way that I do when you just hear people's thoughts. It's so interesting. It helps make me a better person. I hope it makes you a better person. That's why we ask you every night to reach out and talk to us. So do that right now. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. Send us an email at thestory@kgw.com. Because after the break, we're going to read some comments and finish the story. Hey, let's talk about some comments. I mentioned earlier that my watch was, I said, a Breitling, and somebody wrote in and said, cool, you have a watch more than most people's cars. Weird flex for the 6 o'clock news, but okay. It's actually a Seiko. I was just joking, but that was a little insider for people who know watches. Breitling's a beautiful watch. I'm glad that you picked up on that. Through my inbox here, and for the stories emails, the titles of each one: masks, requirement, masks in grocery stores, masks, everything is masks. It is amazing to me that there's so much interest in this, but keep asking us the questions and we will keep trying to dig down and talk about it, because frankly, it's best for everybody to wear masks. And I'm going to try and use facts and resources to explain that to people until I'm blue in the face and that blue face is covered by a mask. Also, the person that was telling me yesterday that they didn't want to see anything in our newscast, it was on the 5 o'clock news. That piece that ran about what's on your mind, that aired just before 5 at like 4:50, so it doesn't count. So you can't blame me. So I've stayed true to my word. Once again, here on The Story. Thank you for being with us. Keep the comments and questions coming. That's it for us for tonight, but don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow.